The show is titled House Tree Person, which is after a personality test. It's a test that is given to people, and they're meant to draw like a house, a tree, and a person. And then whoever gave the test can then sort of like draw out certain psychological things about the person based on what they drew. Also, Strake and Catherine in your video hut for Barefoot Contessa recites what seem to be questions from the test. Could you talk a little bit about why you chose this title? It seems to be a bit of a compass for the show, maybe something you're reflecting on.
Yeah. So the title came about it was a hard process of trying to figure out what to call it, as it sometimes is. I had these house candidates, and I was trying to come up with a show title that didn't have the word in it, because I think it was sort of overplayed. And then I sort of stepped back and looked at everything that I had. And I was like, okay, I have a house, I have a person, and then I have these damn paintings, which are sort of stepping in for the trees. So it became, towards the end of the show, a way to collect everything and organize the thoughts, and try to organize everything conceptually and tie everything together narratively.
That's interesting, because I feel like the test is like, as a diagnostic tool, it is also like taking information in and spitting out like an understanding. So I feel like that's a pretty like productive framework for a show of disparate things.
Yeah, and then it ultimately the whole exhibition is sort of my response to the House Street Person, which was again put together sort of retroactively to tie everything up nicely. But one of the main ideas or themes, questions I'm trying to get at in the show is figuring out what home is to me, or what domesticity is to me, specifically as a trans woman, specifically as a trans woman interested in, I guess, homemakerly things. So.
Yeah, that was clear. So there's one video from the installation. It's called Plet for Barefoot Contessa. And it has a very like Food Network camera angle. It's edited to sort of reflect that kind of like, recipe type of show. And you're in it, and you're sort of gradually donning this like Stregonana costume as you make the work here in the opposite end wall of the gallery. These like lax sheets that seem to be like being spiced in the video, and also colored with different dyes in the video to the different like levels of yellow. And while this is happening, you're reciting, seemingly by memory, recipes from the lesbian archive, but they're specifically recipes about how to help someone when they're feeling sick. And while I was watching this video, which is about 25 minutes, so it's on loop in that little section of the gallery, I found myself thinking about like taking ill, dependency on other people, feeling autonomous, different ways that like neglect can creep into a person's experience being alive, whether it's like societal neglect or personal neglect or otherwise. And the whole thing also had this attitude, like there were moments of like feelings of it being a bit tongue-in-cheek. So it made me wonder, like, maybe what was the most like important emotional transmission for you with the video piece?
Yeah, so I wanted to, I guess, show the process of like self-making and self-mythology. The original idea for this show was in some residency application or show application or whatever. Like 2 years ago, I wrote the words Sapphic Stragon on it, and I was like, okay, what if Stragon is a lesbian?
Yeah.
What if Stragon is a trans lesbian? And it's also a very sort of like being like finishing grad school, being in this sort of transitional period of my life, where I try to be an adult, be a person in the world, figure out what that's like, be an artist in the world. So a lot of sort of retrospective looking at works that I had made, and thinking back to making self-portraits as a freshly minted undergrad figure painter. And which I hadn't done for quite a while. So it was that the video was a way for me to bring that in and try to sort of give a framework and also to create the context for the rest of the work in the show. So it was making these wax slabs, gradually transforming the silicone cast of my head into this persona, and then also changing myself in sort of tandem with it as this test is being proctored. But it was also just, wanting to be funny, wanting to be playful and sort of be silly. And I think that's one of the working with like rigorous sort of formalist abstraction, I think can be really boring. Can be done really badly. So my way of trying not to do that, my way of like working through these ideas that are really sort of rigid and formal and historical, is to be silly and weird. In response to trying to queer it. And then it was also thinking about like connecting with ancestry, because I have this sort of weird like family dynamic thing. So, and being a trans person, I'm trying to figure out being a woman is, how to do this, what that looks like for me. The last show was Horse Girls. I was a horse girl that never rode a horse. And I rode a horse after it, so I broke that. And now it's, I guess, an Italian grandma. I have probably at least like 40 years before I can do that, sort of successfully. But it was also one of the things that I wanted to do was to try and embody the idea of domesticity by turning myself into this thing, this sort of idol of the domestic.
It's interesting bringing up self-portraiture and like situating it in like undergrad. I feel like our artists, that's where you start learning those skills, or maybe you learn those skills even in high school, and then you know, that portrait of yourself that you did in undergrad is maybe one of the last times you really like did that action. So I love the idea of like an artist further along in their career, in their practice, like trying to do something that feels like a really like multivalent self-portrait. That's what I was thinking when I saw the head, the strainer Catherine head in the pot. Like, it takes a certain amount of skill and humor and also confidence in the practice, and that it's like saying something, back to you instead of just like a transfer of like skill and like a likeness. And I think that makes it interesting, and I don't know, it makes it a little less like legible in an interesting way. One of the readings I read to prepare the talk, it's a queer theorist named David J. Getzi, and I took a quote that I thought was interesting and relevant to particularly the video, but the show as a whole is like a recognition from the start of how easy legibility comes with a cost. And I was thinking that the video, it's like long, it's slow, it kind of, you get stuck in its like cinematic time, and you find yourself like your mind kind of wandering and connecting these things. And I guess I wonder, like, as an abstract painter, is that something that you also, is there a sense of time that you like, yours to feel in the paintings that are maybe not, it's not in the video, or vice versa? Like, do you want people to stay for the evenings and have a similar feeling of mystery or illegibility, or are you interested in that being more like a quick read? Or
I mean, I think like one of the big things that I talked about with my professors in grad school was the colleague of Oliveros, like deep listening, just sort of sitting with something and letting it sort of come to you, let it unfold. The video I tried to make, it should be like roughly things like 23 minutes, maybe like a second. I wanted it to be the length of sort of standard GP episode with no ad breaks. It's sort of like standard runtime. So it's asking, I guess, to be engaged with a little bit more. The paintings, I think, and obviously I want people to sit with them and look at them, and I try to put a lot of stuff and a lot of material touches and sort of care and concern into them to make them sort of unfold over time. But I like the idea of seeing something and maybe having an immediate reaction to it, and then as you spend more time, as you sort of form a relationship with this thing, it starts to change. And I think that's one of the sort of core like artistic things that I'm interested in the paintings and the sculpture and the video, that is trying to, I guess, teach people how to read things differently, especially with abstraction. You know, you can read a lot into it. I'm giving you this narrative, but ultimately I want the work to be able to function formally on its own, without all this extra stuff. I mean, the extra stuff is just me, I guess, liking to do a lot of work, making myself do a lot of repetitive processes.
Yeah, I think the video really does immediately remind me of like a Food Network show. So I feel like that on a formal level immediately engages if you're in like in that, and then you are reciting recipes, but then there's this like little moment of dissonance where you're like, oh, you know, what is she making? It's not these recipes, and then the recipes themselves become poetic and, you know, are not just about executing meal.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's got all of these different like touch points that are being pulled in some of your writing about this show and elsewhere. You talk about transsexual world building, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the sort of like barefoot Contessa style format of the video, and maybe how, I mean, you've spoken a little bit already, like in your view of like your particular sense of domesticity, you know, what things from that are you looking to pull, and how do they feel like they're, I don't know, like activating a sense of like home or house to you?
Yeah, so I think my sort of like research process for making any work generally, or making this work, is sort of born from an obsession with a specific image, and like really, really like drive it all, and really just like sitting with it and chewing on it for a long time. The sort of transsexual world building is my way of I guess trying to
It's okay.
trying to, I guess, queer or critique domesticity, ideas of tradwifery, sort of motherhood, home sort of relationships, and pulling specifically from Strigonona and then Ryan the Garden or the Barefoot Contessa. It was trying to relate to these women who I think are very sort of extravagant and fun, and like also like very like bougie and like luxurious,
Really, yeah.
like campy too. And I think that fits into the humor and play of it all. And then the, you know, reciting these recipes and making something else is, I think, just a sort of like disconnect, like an obstruction kind of,
Totally.
that I wanted to sort of keep in there, because like, if that was a perfectly clear, linear narrative straight through, then it maybe would read a little bit differently with everything else. So I wanted to try and layer some things formally in that to mimic the ways that I'm layering other things in the show.
Completely. I totally see, I think, formally in the video that, there are layers of rhyming, almost as though, like, while you're like pouring the wax, it does seem like, you could be making the thing that you're reciting, but it's not quite there. And I think that as I don't know, like a auditory, like visual experience or like a temporal experience with the video, it does fit right into, the niche of like formal abstraction that looks a little bit like a space, but it's not quite carrying over to like spatiality. Which leads us to the paintings we were surrounded by, which I love. This is before I even got to know you and your practice. When I first came across these on the internet, I just like immediately loved them. Loved the colors, graphic quality, the texture of them. They're just insanely rigorous and great formal abstract paintings. But really what elevates the show, I think, to a whole nother level is that they are like really well situated within this, I don't know, narrative of like reflection and understanding and evolution. And another quote that I thought was maybe like relevant to the paintings was same guy, David Jetsy. Materials and processes can be used to evoke the complexities of personhood and its accruals, transformations, and exchanges. And I like that because I like the word accrual. When I think of your work, I think of like accrual of like paste, like you mix like additives into the paint, like it's clearly like there's shit stuck on the canvases like that. Those are like, they're heavy, they're full of things. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about maybe like the painterliness of the paintings themselves, as opposed maybe, or like, focusing on the paintings that maybe don't even have like the beeswax additional figures on them.
Yeah.
So I guess they would be like the huts in the show context.
Yeah, so the work is all like very much process oriented, which I think conceptually comes from being a trans person and seeing transitioning as just an ongoing process, and like a sort of constant interrogation. So with these paintings, they're very like, I think accrual is very accurate because they vary like sort of from painting to painting, but largely the idea was I'm gonna put like 6 coats of gesso, I'm gonna put a net on it, and put like 10 or 15 layers of acrylic paint, and I'm gonna do like maybe 5 or 6 layers of oil paint and wax on top of that. So, and some of the paintings have little like, Damien was saying that the other. So, were you in prison? There's like little like count the days, like little markings on them. Those were to keep track of either. I think it was probably like acrylic coats, but it's just laying stuff down, laying stuff down, laying stuff down, and repeating. Because I think one of the main things that I'm interested in painting and in working with grids and sort of conceptually is repetition and repetitive processes, like which could be like writing a recipe, could be like following a cookbook. So I try to do that sort of for here, and then like with the hut paintings, and it's flexible from each one. The white painting down on that wall only has like 4 or 5 coats of paint, which is like really thin, but that one behind you has, like, if you hold it on the back, it feels like a panel because of how sort of thick and heavy it is. But building off of like previous like body of net paintings, was trying to like queer the grid or like engage with the grid as like an art historical thing and as a formal thing, but in a way that's sort of fun and playful. So those paintings were all very much like thin, really about like just color relationships and composition and how sort of things interact. within this larger structure. With these paintings, what I wanted to do was to try and, like, one of the ideas that came up in making that work was that the grid is a skeletal structure, or the net is like skeletal structure. If I'm going to make like work that deals with embodiment or thinking about embodiment, then I should really flesh that out. And so I was like, okay, I want to make net paintings, but I want to bury the net. And then I'm going to cut it off at the sides. So in some of them, it's harder to see. In some of them, you can see little overhangs from the side, but to try and mask that and really have it be sort of a surface level structure for me to put a bunch of flesh on. That just sort of looks like really thick, yummy paint.
Looking at these paintings as you're talking, I really do feel like there's a like a extra level of like personhood in them due to the texture of the net. They remind you of bones sticking out of skin, or just something that is not just like the planarity of the stretch canvas, which I think in the context of your work like speaks to the further like querying of like a convention of picture making, and also sort of, I don't know, finding ways to like insist upon your personhood through, you know, a historical context that may not like have traditionally had room for it in its like fullness. Some of the work, especially the one behind you, I feel like has like a architectural, like the net has a wave to it, and it's not so much like an array of squares. It kind of is like, so also for people who may not have like had time to look at the press release, Kat's work is like divided into, or the paintings are mostly divided into like pins that are like dams and pins that are like huts, and these ones with the nets are the dam paintings, and or the huts, sorry, the huts. And to me that makes me think of like, they're like constructed, they're like you're building like a shelter in the woods, or you're building, like this one to me looks like a tent or a shelter, something that needs skeletal, you know, structure to it, but then you can kind of like, you know, put something over it and it becomes like a protective thing. It kind of makes the painting extend outside of just like a picture plane. I guess I'm wondering if like, if you could talk a little bit about identifying them in that way, or giving them those names, because it feels like it is very akin to the house tree person question of the test, but it's like, are those like, you know, is this something you came up with like in addition to that? And you can maybe explain like to you the conceptual difference between them?
Between the huts and the dams, or between the huts? So the hut, with the net paintings and sort of with the paintings in general, I think the process, or boiling it down to like a thing, like a single like sort of punchy sentence, is just like an image on top of a structure. So for these, it is a sort of an abstracted like house, similar to the ones that like you draw when you're a kid, which is I think what really sort of gave the title. These were here first. These were finished first. They were huts before the house tree person.
I see.
And then it's sort of just repeating the form over different sort of size of net, different sort of size of canvas. Some are more sort of house shaped, some are more just sort of like four squares. And so,
as opposed to like, I feel like the dams, I mean, they're a completely different palette, and they also have these wax figures on them that I read initially as like either like alabaster like chess pieces, or like ghosts. Like they have a completely different like finish materiality, even though you could tell a lot of the paint on the surface is the same type of paint, just different colors.
Yeah, so for the dams, those were more like, there was a recipe for all of them. It was like, I think 14 steps or something.
Wow.
And it was like wax, oil, wax, oil, wax, oil, wax, oil. Bunch of like, because I made them from some shitty like scrap wood that I got from the job that I was working. And I was like, I'm just going to cut all these panels and use up all the scrap wood that I have in my studio to back them and sort of like just make them look nice. And then it was like, I think the wood was treated, so it was really, like when I was gessoing it would just turn green, which was really weird.
Nice.
And concerning. So I needed to get as much paint on there as possible to give me a white surface.
Wow.
I knew I wanted them to be white paintings, and I knew I wanted them to be based on ornamental, like air registers. So the little vents and the walls that kick out hot and cold air. Some are more decorative than others. Some are just sort of straight up, like vertical slats, horizontal slats. But to get that, I put a net on the painting at the beginning, sort of drew out the grid, and then made whichever pattern within that. And then ended by framing them nicely, because the sides were ugly because it was just a bunch of trash wood. And then putting the little objects on them. The dam part of it comes, I guess, to fill the house tree. But I was thinking about these grades as sort of transitional spaces, and also spaces that mediate sort of comfort and warmth within a home. So what makes us feel good? I think if I'm gonna say what makes my home feel good is it smells like Italian seasoning and has some hot air blowing from the extremely strong radiators. So I'm unfortunately don't get to deal with these, but I have a radiator that's like this big and like this wide, and it just kills me. I can't even turn it on. But I was thinking about those spaces as these transitional spaces, and then I was thinking about those spaces as a sort of like that sort of middle point, as trying to relate that to the idea of the beaver dam, of making a little sort of thing, structure, whatever a beaver dam is. I'm not a science person or an animal person. The beaver was more a cheeky way for me to just, like, I guess, get a lesbian joke in there. To sort of be like sort of clear about it or blunt about it. But I think it's a similar sort of idea where they're trying to sort of make a home in this transitional space. And it sort of causes all these like disruptions, but they're very sort of like sort of steadfast and star and cute little guys. So I don't know exactly how many paintings in here have that, but the ones that have the damn paintings that have the little guys on them, they're just little beaver figurines that I cast. There's I think the one in that room is like a little miniature house. There's a dollhouse scale fireplace, and then the one with the stack of little houses on there, dollhouse scale dollhouses. So similar idea, putting an image on like the structure, but now sort of at the very end, just trying to mimic whatever sort of pattern is going on with these inclusions.
It's so interesting that those are also net paintings, but they're like the negative space of the net. It does really like kind of create like a polarity with these ones.
Yeah.
There's so much wax in all of this work. It's fun by the wax.
Yeah.
I feel like there's cold wax mixed into the paint, but also this amazing installation of wax, I guess, squares that you are the product of the spraying on video. I don't know, there's something, when I was looking at them after the video, I was really struck by what felt to me like a logic of like rhyming in the work. Like they themselves look a lot like one another with somewhat different variances of color and pattern of the spices or the thyme that's in there. The candlestick fingers look sort of like, I don't know, organic vegetables or carrots or something to me. They also look like candles. They look, and I feel like the paintings also, the ones that have a lot of wax on the surface, like remind me of like skin, where there's always just like something that it looks a little bit like, but is not quite like it. And so I was wondering if you think about maybe some of the logic of the work is thinking about something that is like maybe conventionally presented one way, or in the sake of the video, like what would be on, the Barefoot Contessa's or Ina Garden's like table. Would there be candles? What if those candles were fingers? Like, is there this sort of like one-to-one explicit like querying, you could say, of like objects in that way? And if so, maybe talk about that a little more.
Yeah, so I think in sort of queer theory, like trans theory, like language, the like approximation and the sort of like closeness is something to do with like passing and sort of shape shifting and trying to fit into context, and then also creating like playful associations between fingers and carrots and candles, and the sort of working against the idea of like perfection, and sort of either perfection sort of formally or perfection sort of like craftsmanshiply. I don't want to say that I make bad sort of work, but it's I show my hand,
Right.
and I'm interested in showing my hand. And these like framed ones, some of them get all crazy. There's like gaps and nails in weird places and over supported. But I think they look very nice, and I try to put a lot of care into them. So I try and like talk down. But I think the rhyming is a sort of abstraction. Then also like dealing with an openness and leaving an openness, so that you can read all of these things into fingers. You read them as carrots, candles, whatever, and wanting to keep that openness as sort of like conceptually as like a queer thing, and then also just sort of showing proof of like how it's made. The fingers are my fingers, made at Hauschen and Old, and I cast them in plastic while I was wearing those little like witch fingers that you get from the store. So most of them came out okay. Some of them, the finger got like tip of the nail got caught in the mold, because I made a really crazy looking silicone block mold to put 7 fingers in, and it just looks like a monster, with all of the scrap silicone that I had from grad school. So
Totally. I was wondering, I mean, looking at the installation I sat with a little bit after the video, and it would make sense if you wanted to kind of keep this like also abstract, but like, is there a logic to you of like the number of squares or sheets of wax, and do they have a relationship to you particularly with the dam paintings? Because I was like, the tray that you poured the wax into in the video looked a lot like the frames of the dam paintings to me, so it kind of reminded me of like in the sort of same like Food Network world, like when they like put something into the oven and then they already have fresh one, then you'd be like, adding this one just came out. So it made me think a little bit of that kind of like these things related. One of them is cooking, one of them is done. They're both made of wax, but they have, this one looks almost like it has cake frosting on it,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. One was like prepared ahead of time for camera.
Yes. Neither of them are food, but they're very food-like.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it started out as the idea for that installation was I was going to make these wax squares held up by the fingers, and I was going to do like a 5x5 grid, and I was going to do like image transfer drawings from the video onto the wax, and I was like, I can just have it be. That's like hat on a hat. I can just have it be. This is enough. So there's like 27, and that is just because of the sort of pattern that I wanted to do, which is this same house sort of pattern that I've been working with throughout the whole show. The form, they're 11 by 14, which I think at this point is just a sort of format. It's like a standard format
Mm-hmm.
for paper sizes,
Mhm.
and for like panels and stuff. I've made a bunch of paintings on 11 by 14. For the last show that I did, I made 276 silicone tiles of 11 by 14 inch paintings.
Mm.
So that's just a nice little like iterative um, dimension for me to work with.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, I guess, largely determined by process
Mm-hmm.
and like a result of
Mhm.
process. There's herbs and dried oils in them. The color is just, I ordered the same white beeswax for most of them, and they came in all these weird colors, like that sort of boogery like yellow is just, that's like the white beeswax for some reason. Even though the last time like I got white beeswax to make, I made some cinder blocks out of wax,
Mm-hmm.
and they're really like beautiful white color. And I was like, okay, this is what it's going to be. And then I got it, and it was green, and it smelled like melons. It smelled like fake. It's been a fake. So I was like, just sort of given this weird sort of palette because of the material. The yellow is actually just yellow beeswax, I think, probably like unaged. So that's a really nice, like, punchy color to contrast it. And then there's rosemary, thyme, oregano, basil, and sage,
Delicious.
dried, and classic Italian.
Classic Italian.
Dried herbs and essential oils in there to sort of give it a little bit of a smell.
Do you feel like you compose things differently when they have like vernacular color, like the beeswax is always going to be what it is, versus painting, where you could kind of mix any old color?
I think it's an interesting color sort of exercise. This whole sort of show was, in terms of color, was like way more restrained than the last one. Less sort of hyper color. I think the one that's closest to what the previous paintings were is this bright green one over there. But it was, I think, trying to limit myself a little bit more, wanting to make like white paintings and not being able to make white paintings so that it comes out blue, comes out purple. And, you know, sort of working with, okay, if I'm going to make a cornfield painting, I can just do sort of cornfield yellow, stripe. But if I want to do this larger sort of like installation thing, if I'm going to work with materials, I don't necessarily want to alter them too much, with the exception of like silicone, which I'll pigment. But bust is just the same silicone as the little inclusions, but just with some pink pigment in it. So I think with like the wax and the like rubber fingers, I was like, I don't want to do anything to this. It's going to be what it is, and that's fine. And it's fine because then if I want to make a really colorful painting, then I can just make a really colorful painting. So I think it's a nice way to, like, working with, I guess, sort of like raw materials is maybe like a little bit of a challenge for me to then bring that sort of color sense into making the actual paintings.
Past couple questions, I feel like you've answered with like some way that you like, I don't know, sort of like show restraint to yourself in the making and be like, well, I'm not gonna color it, or I'm not gonna do the image transfer. And that, I think I can relate someone to, like, as like an abstract painter, or someone who wants to render things in some ways but not in other ways. I can relate a little bit to that, and I wonder if that to you feels like it will always be a part of the work. And then did the video in like showing yourself and also showing, like, you know, I don't know, like a disembodied head of yourself going through like a transition into Straganana, a different transition into Straganana, like, did that feel more legible to you than the legible in the terms of like your personality than the paintings do? Or do you feel like the paintings, you know, they carry a lot of meaning just at the surface too, like even pointing at that one, you said like cornfield painting. I was like, that's not what I was thinking.
I think I'm somebody who makes a lot of rules, especially specifically like with studio stuff, and limits myself in just ways, just to sort of, I guess, keep myself moving forward and sort of focused. But also at the same time, my favorite thing to say to everybody in any context is I don't make the rules, I just follow them, even though I make the rules all the time. So I think the video gets into like representation, and so it's like a little bit harder to, I guess, or like I guess me showing myself in there is different from me showing myself in the paintings, purely just because it's me putting on a thing, it's my head, and then I'm sort of relating to that. But then with the paintings, it's more sort of like an archive or like a documentation of like touch, material, time and labor, and the sort of like, I guess, emotion of sitting with a painting for a really long time and then finishing it, having to put it out in the world.
Well, maybe as a last question before we move it over to, a Q&A, as, a solo show with a lot of different mediums in it, do you feel like your paintings are communicating through the video in the way that you were hoping to achieve? Or do you feel like they are working kind of together to create like an overall communication? Or do you think that they, in the future, would you put maybe more space or show them separately?
First off, I don't want to ever look at Premiere again for a long time. That was annoying. I had to re-record all the audio because I didn't get it good enough the first time. I had to Foley in all the sound because the audio wasn't good, and I had to just do all this work and really sit on the computer. And I don't have to do anything computer-wise. Everything else is just, in person, in flesh. I think in terms of, I guess, relating that to the work that's in there, to the work that's in here, I was really trying to think of everything, I think of the exhibition holistically, and try and have everything tag off of each other, depart in some ways, come back together, sort of like through like callbacks, and then material. So I think like the material of wax was really the thread that ran through it. There's wax in the paintings, there's wax in the dams, there's wax on that wall, the video was wax focused. So I guess I would do it differently next time.
But it sounds also like some things are like truly successful. Before even talking to you about it, I came out of looking at everything with a close read, like thinking of the wax as this like transitive property across all of it that can be morphed and molded and also mixed into, like it feels like it was like kind of had a character of its own. And so I feel like that was a successful kind of like, I don't know, integration across media.
Yeah. I think it's like, again, setting these rules for myself that I'm a painter. I have to make paintings, and wanting to do other things, and I guess trying to grapple with the wanting to do other things,
right? But
also finding myself, and like I think the big sort of takeaway from the show for me is that I am a painter and I do like to make paintings, and I think I can't get away from that. That's a rule that I can't get away from.
Sometimes the jury is the purpose.
Exactly.
Amazing. Exactly. Oh, great. So let's turn it over to the audience. Anybody have any questions for Kat?
I'm so interested in how you landed on this like many layered process in your paintings, and also when you were talking about it, it made me think about all the layers that exist underneath. And is it hard for you to paint over them sometimes because you really love what's there? Do you grieve that at all, or is it easy just to keep going?
I think it depends. I think really thinking about process and really thinking about process in the context of transition and the sort of like successiveness of everything, I'm like, okay, it's not like it's done when it's done. And if there's like a state that I like, then there's a state that I like, and I can try and bring that back. Like with this one and then the brown one, I did like a really brushy like acrylic underpainting. I was like, okay, I want to try and get that at the end and bring it back. It came back in a different way, but it was sort of it was different. So I think I like the flexibility and I think I like the journey. The stops along the way can be nice, but I think I'm a person who can just I'm also a person who's thrown away so many paintings and painted over unstretched, just straight up tossed in an incinerator.
The old incinerator.
Yeah. So the heads that you've made, I'm remembering it's coming out of a crock pot, correct? Or so I was wondering if there's any relationship to Sylvia Plath. I was thinking about like you slowly forming the self and rising out of this like slow cooker process. And if Sylvia Plath was going to re-enter the world, like a person that was somewhat at odds with like inherited ideas of womanhood in general, she went out head first, go to the oven, and you're reforming the self head first coming out.
I love that reading. It's a great reading. I'm post grad school. I'm in my bimbo era. I was like thinking about all of this, and I was trying to come up with like some core text, and I was like, I really don't. I don't know why. There was like obviously some like text that I'm sort of referencing, sort of literally, but that's really fun. The crock pot. I made the head, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do with the head. Whether I was going to, like, at some point I was going to, like, suspend it, which would have been really weird, but it's, like, just solid silicone, so it's, like, 10 pounds, 15 pounds. And then I had this crock pot, this really nice crock pot, because I got a bunch of crock pots from the thrift store to make all this waxwork, because if I have 3 crock pots, that goes quicker than just one. That one doesn't really work well. So I think I cut the cord off and like taped it underneath, and then I was like really trying to figure out what to do to like how to, I guess, display the head. And it sort of came. I can't remember if it was, I think it was pre-video. I was like, okay, I'm gonna put it in the crock pot. But I'm gonna say that it's a Sylvia Plath because that's inspired.
I'm really curious about what you're saying at the end about coming out of this and just reaffirming that yes, I am a painter. I make paintings, and especially because there seems to be so many kind of like you're moving in and out of genres and roles, and then I don't know, is like painter like a role? Like, is that something that you're kind of reconsidering painter since you've now made video work and Insta whatever all this stuff? Are you coming back to that? Is that different now?
I think my sort of relationship to that and going on all these sort of like tangential sort of material explorations, it has always been about like, even if I'm making I'm making like 300 silicone casts, it's because I want to replicate, I guess, make a copy of a painting surface. So all these other things I think are still dealing with painting problems. Which was something that I was like aware of as I'm sort of doing them. But I think when I'm making a video, when I'm making the installation, I think I'm coming at it as a painter, sort of. And I think that's what I realized. I think that's why I can't escape it, or don't want to escape it.
Hey, yeah. I was just wondering because you mentioned that you're kind of like a rule person, like you make all these like rules for yourself, and you obviously have a big interest in like the grid, which is such a rigid form. I guess I'm wondering if you have any parameters when you're breaking that down. Like when you're breaking down the grid, is it like kind of like, are there any rules that you follow, or is it just kind of like intuitive?
How do you mean?
As in kind of like you seem to have very diverse ways of breaking down all these grids, you know, and into sometimes more physical forms, or sometimes just, I don't know, just sometimes they're like more or less dynamic. And I guess I wonder if you follow kind of like a standard process for each of them.
Sort of. It's with these paintings, it's stretching it and then sort of letting physics or whatever, gravity, like determine the warp, and then working with that and trying to find something. I think for the next paintings that I'm gonna make, I'm gonna be a lot more sort of intentional with the placement of the net and the stretching, like the manipulation of the net to actually like fully manipulate it instead of relying sort of on chance, and then experimentation and play to get to the final image. I think that will still be there because I think that's just how I make images. But it's, I mean, I love stripes, and I love sort of checker parts. So I think these sort of patterns will follow me, and the grid will follow me. But I think it'll be a process of me, I guess, trying to control it, or like just trying to, I guess, own it a little bit more.
I think you mentioned sort of your tendency to gravitate towards repetitions. I was wondering, I was just curious if there was anything specific about repetition that you enjoyed it, or why you think you gravitate towards it.
I think it's a combination of being like a routine person and a person who's sort of doing these like following a schedule, trying to be as like regulated as possible. Because if I don't do that, then I can get really disoriented sort of easily. So I think that comes into the work. The repetition is like a sort of formal historical interest with the grid and then like the boop 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 boop. But then also I think the first time when I was like, okay, like I think repetition is the thing, or sort of one of the ways, like the main ways I'm going to talk about it, because it was like the idea of seeing something and being like, oh, that's so me, and then like repeating that and trying to like embody that and seeing how that sort of transformation and change in that repetition sort of creates either new me or a new thing.
You use the phrase show your hand in terms of like the construction of the painting, and like I'm gonna use robot like in the sense of like tangibility, or like not looseness, but I would just love to hear more about that, and then, like what you think is if showing your hand opens up space in the painting, then like what that openness, looseness, what comes through, and like what is opened up by that.
I think in the project of like querying old sort of like rigorous formalism, because in all of that it's like very much I need to get a perfect surface and I can't show myself, I can't show anything, and that's sort of the sort of idea of like using a stick instead of a brush, or using a squeegee and just like fully leveling out, like because there was a whole process I guess in the history of abstraction of just fully removing the artist's hand, and I'm really interested in this work for some reason. I just like it. And now I've spent a long time thinking about it and working with it. But that is the sort of history that I'm working with. And if I'm going to try and sort of make a queer take on it, or a trans take on it, I think sort of negating one of those core ideas will automatically, like instantly take it into something else, instantly sort of transform the context that it was originally in. And then I just like a thick paint arc. So I think it's a matter of preference, and then when it gets sort of like historical
thinking and fucking with.
I'm really drawn to this netting, and just imagining your process of selecting it, because for me, it's just been fun to imagine like all the different types of knitting that exist. And it's taking me towards like skirts. It's taking like maybe gardening or like protective sort of netting, fashion. And so I'm just curious how like these ones seem tied together in terms of like the quality of the knitting. And I just would like to hear maybe you could share more about the selecting of the knitting.
Yeah, the netting is, I guess, sort of like a ready-made sort of found material. I do get the sports netting, so the ones that have the big squares, I think, are like soccer nets or maybe like tennis nets or something, just because that's what they sell. And that's what they sell like at a scale. So if I want to make a really big net painting, I gotta buy a soccer net because they just need that much. So there's like a limited sort of size and like flexibility and like expandability that is determined by like what I can get. I think the white one is like really thin, really, I think it's like bird netting, maybe like gardening netting. So I think that's also why I want to manipulate it more, because I have, I guess, a more sort of determined starting point to work from, which has sort of taken away a decision as I've started to make these paintings. So it's like, okay, I know I'm going to do this. That's one less thing I have to think about. Now I just have to figure out like what to do with it. And I think that's why I want to like manipulate it more extensively and more sort of further. But I like, again, with this similar idea of like stretching the net over and letting the pattern determine what the image is, I think it's a similar idea with like the sort of material of the netting. It was also like a color thing. It's harder to tell in these because it's varied, but some of them are like a really nice bright orange and some of them are like a really nice bright yellow. There's like a natural sort of rope and like a white, but it's all buried here. So yeah.
I think it really brings that sense of playfulness that you mentioned. Like it holds that somehow. Yeah. Thanks.
Good.